Rishi Sunak followed in the footsteps of Joe Biden this Thursday, visiting Israel as the Israeli military continue to pound Gaza with more airstrikes. The British Prime Minister Sunak underlining Western support for Israel. A Royal Navy British warship was sent to the Eastern Mediterranean as a sign of an intention of support to the wider Israeli cause.
I'm here to express my solidarity with the Israeli people. You have suffered an unspeakable, horrific act of terrorism, and I want you to know that the United Kingdom and I stand with you.
Rishi Sunak there. Let's bring in now John Lyndon, Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, to get more of an insight into where world leaders are standing, especially, John, Joe Biden, expected to speak very soon. What is his policy right now? He's been to the Middle East. He's made some kind of impact in terms of calling for aid to go through, and then he's gone away, and then the bombing continues. What does Biden want out of this, do you think, John?
I think his first and overriding priority is to avoid escalation into a regional war. You can see that with the mobilization of 2 carrier groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. I think with his preference to have gone to Amman for this sort of tripartite summit with other Arab leaders, which sadly and tragically, in my view, did not happen due to the events in Gaza on Wednesday evening. And you look at President Biden is looking at Ukraine, the South China Sea, and just from a pure realistic geopolitical perspective, avoiding a huge regional war in the Middle East is probably what you would want the leader of the free world to be trying to do right now. I think then there's also the very clear backing he's given to Israel's self-defense and now what it is doing, its operations in Gaza. He's been very unambiguous about that. What I hope is happening behind the scenes is that the space opened up and the trust of speaking directly to the Israeli people when he visited this week has given him room to be able to be a little bit more firm in private conversations around the need for humanitarian aid and the prioritization of civilian life. It's not clear yet whether those messages have been delivered and are landing. We've heard that there's 20 trucks being allowed into the Gaza Strip, still unclear of the timing and the status of that. There's reports this evening about a UN flagged operation at Rafah Crossing, which could facilitate further aid. But as of yet, we have not seen the doors swing open and the much needed aid be delivered to Gaza.
The word revenge we hear a lot, the word retaliation we hear a lot. Do you wish that perhaps we heard the word justice a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, justice is in the eye of the beholder, and particularly in the Middle East. I think ultimately both Israelis and Palestinians will have ideas of what a just resolution or a just retribution for what's taking place is. And sometimes justice and revenge can be close to synonyms, depending upon the level of trauma that are visited on different people. The word I would be looking for is a word that's fallen out of fashion in Israel-Palestine in recent years. It's peace, and all that actually means. Right now we have, as I mentioned, a geopolitical issue, a humanitarian issue, both incredibly important. Ultimately, this is all the result of conflict management, of pretending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be managed to simmer along without devastating consequences for civilians. And what I think needs to happen as soon as possible is a de-escalation of hostilities and then a very firm diplomatic commitment to follow through a conflict resolution process to the end, which they have not tried for over 2 decades.
John, what are you looking for from Joe Biden when he makes his speech in a few hours' time?
I think we hear there's going to be a $100 billion supplemental aid package with obviously elements of it for Ukraine as well as for the Middle East. I think, number one, having said what he said about his support for Israel, I think now there's a chance to speak to the Arab world as well, which is equally important, particularly since he didn't have a chance to visit Jordan this year. I think speaking directly to his administration's policy about equal measures of peace, justice, security for both Palestinians and Israelis, we now need to hear what that means and to show Palestinians a diplomatic horizon, a sense that after this tragedy, there will be a real initiative to build peace. And then finally, for us at ALLMEP, yes, we need reconstruction, we need rehabilitation of the infrastructure destroyed, but we also need a Marshall Plan to rehabilitate 2 incredibly traumatized societies. Israeli and Palestinian societies are much younger than ours in Western Europe or in North America. Young people have been traumatized to a degree that's hardly believable over the last 2 weeks, seeing images either on screens or with their own eyes, which will be with them forever. And the international community now needs to embark, I think, on a long-term project to bring Israelis and Palestinians together, rebuild trust, build that diplomatic horizon I mentioned, and have a bottom-up grassroots process that can actually have a deeply rooted peace process that sticks.
John, thank you for being very broad and wide-ranging on this, because we appreciate your views on all manner, all aspects of this conflict. You mentioned aid a bit earlier. Can I take you back to that? Because clearly we're talking tomorrow, depending on who we believe and who's saying what, that the Rafah crossing will be reopened. That aid will be going through. Clearly that aid is urgently needed, but Israel's caveat on that is that it goes to civilians. And of course, once it's past the border, there's no way of controlling who gets what, is there?
No, I mean, look, ultimately, there's no such thing as like a sterile process with regards to delivery of aid, military operations. If we're asked to accept the reality of what's euphemistically and pretty grimly sometimes called collateral damage, where people's lives are lost in military operations, I think we should be willing to accept that some of the aid that saves lives may fall into hands of people we prefer it didn't. And we're talking about food, medicine, and fuel, right? So it's not like machine guns are entering the Gaza Strip. And I think you asked the previous question about what we'd like to hear from President Biden. We really need to make sure that this is non-negotiable. Now, both Egypt and Israel have a role to play. I thought Prime Minister Sunak's comments in the press conference with President Herzog today were very shrewdly delivered. We have to speak over the heads of the leaders to the Israeli people as well. Yes, the Western world has Israel's back in a way that I have never seen before with regards to support for a military operation. But associated with that needs to be just as firm and non-negotiable a commitment to protecting the lives of innocent Palestinians who have now been without critical basic needs for almost 2 weeks. And we have a danger of some serious humanitarian consequences, even beyond what we've seen, things like waterborne diseases and malnutrition. That cannot be allowed to happen.
John Lyndon, Executive Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. Thank you, as ever, for joining us here in France 24. We always appreciate your time. Thank you. John Lyndon there.